You don't belong in this world, James. Look at you. You're invisible. Those were the last words Julian whispered to his wife, gripping her arm hard enough to bruise right in the center of London's most exclusive gala. He thought he was clearing the way for his success, cutting off the dead weight of his modest, quiet marriage to impress the elite. He opened the heavy oak doors and shoved her into the cold night, convinced he had just saved his reputation. He had no idea that the fleet of armored Rolls-Royces pulling up to the curb wasn't for the Prime Minister. He didn't know that the man stepping out wearing the royal crest of Calum was looking for his lost daughter. Julian had just evicted his wife, moments before the king arrived to kneel at her feet. The chandeliers inside the grand ballroom of the Kensington Palace Hotel did not just sparkle, they seemed to judge. Every crystal prism caught the light of 1,000 flashbulbs, refracting it onto the diamonds and silks of London's upper crust. The air smelled of expensive perfume, Chanel No. 5 Santal 33, and the metallic tang of old money. Julian Thorne adjusted his bow tie in the reflection of a passing waiter's silver tray. He was handsome, undeniably so, with the sharp jawline of a man who had fought his way up from the gritty streets of East London to the polished boardrooms of Canary Wharf. But tonight his eyes were darting nervously, scanning the room for approval. "Stop fidgeting, Julian," a soft voice said beside him. He looked down. James stood there, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She was wearing a dress of pale blue chiffon. It was simple, painfully simple, compared to the structural avant-garde gowns worn by the wives of the investors Julian was trying to woo. It was a dress off the rack, likely from a high street store, which she had tailored herself to fit her slender frame. "I'm not fidgeting." Julian snapped his voice a low hiss so as not to alert the nearby guests. "I'm strategizing. And you're standing on the hem of your dress. You look like a schoolgirl lost at a museum." James flinched, but her expression remained calm. Her eyes, a striking shade of violet blue, held a depth that Julian had never quite bothered to explore. "I'm just trying to support you, Julian. You said this night was important." "Important, James. This is the Crimson Charity Ball. Lord Holloway is here. The Duke of Sussex is rumored to make an appearance. My entire merger with Sterling Corp depends on me looking like I belong here." He took a sip of champagne, his knuckles white against the glass. "And honestly, James, you're making it very hard to look the part." James looked down at her shoes, simple nude heels scuffed slightly at the toe. "I thought I looked nice," she whispered. "I pinned my hair up the way you like." "It's not about looking nice. It's about looking expensive," Julian muttered, turning his shoulder away from her as he spotted a potential client. For the last 3 years this had been their dynamic. When they met, Julian was a struggling junior analyst, and James was a quiet librarian who volunteered at the animal shelter. She had been his sanctuary. She made him tea when he worked late, listened to his rants about office politics, and believed in him when no one else did. But as Julian's bank account grew, his memory of their shared struggles faded. He began to see James not as his partner, but as a relic of the poverty he was desperate to escape. She didn't know how to schmooze. She didn't drink alcohol. She didn't laugh at the crude jokes the bankers made. She was just there. "Oh, look, it's the Thornes!" A shrill voice pierced the ambient chatter. Julian stiffened. Approaching them was Isabella Vance, the daughter of the CEO of Sterling Corp. She was everything James was not: loud, dripping in rubies, and aggressively confident. She wore a crimson gown that left little to the imagination and cost more than the house Julian grew up in. "Isabella," Julian said, his voice instantly transforming into smooth velvet. He took her hand and kissed the air above it. "You look breathtaking tonight." Isabella smirked, her eyes sliding dismissively over James. "And you brought the little wife. How quaint." She leaned in, whispering loud enough for James to hear. "Is that the same dress she wore to the Christmas party last year, Julian, really? Sustainability is a trend, but poverty isn't." Julian's face flushed a deep crimson. "It's a favorite of hers. Sentimental value. How boring! Isabella sighed, linking her arm through Julian's, effectively cutting James out of the circle. Come, Julian. My father is over by the bar talking to the senator. He wants to ask you about the Q3 projections. You can explain it better than your emails. Julian hesitated for a fraction of a second. He looked at James. She was standing alone now, buffeted by the crowd, looking small and fragile. A decent husband would have included her. A loving husband would have defended her. But Julian Thorne was a hungry husband. Stay here, he ordered James, his voice cold. Don't talk to anyone. Don't embarrass me. I'll be back. He allowed Isabella to drag him away, leaving his wife standing alone in the middle of the ballroom floor under the judging glare of the chandeliers. James watched him go, a strange, sad smile touching her lips. She reached up and touched the small silver locket she always wore hidden beneath her dress. He really doesn't know, does he? She whispered to herself. An hour passed. James had retreated to the edge of the room, standing near a large potted fern, nursing a glass of sparkling water. She watched Julian work the room. He was in his element, laughing, shaking hands, oozing charisma. He looked like a king in his own mind. She checked her watch. A battered leather-strapped piece that looked archaic next to the Rolexes in the room. 9:45 p.m. They should be close, she thought. I tried to tell him. I tried to warn him. She had attempted to speak to Julian that morning. She had sat him down at their breakfast table and said, Julian, my family, they might be coming to visit soon. There are things I haven't told you. But Julian had been on his phone checking stocks. James, I don't have time for your country cousins coming to beg for money. Keep them away from the house while I'm closing this deal. He hadn't listened. He never listened anymore. Suddenly, Julian appeared in front of her. He wasn't smiling. He was sweating, and his eyes were wide with a mix of panic and fury. What are you doing standing here? He hissed. I'm doing what you said, Julian. I'm staying out of the way. Well, you're not doing a very good job. Lord Harrington just asked me who the depressing woman in the blue rag was. He thought you were the hired help. Julian wiped his forehead with a silk handkerchief. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? I am trying to close a £50 million deal, and you look like you wandered in from a charity soup kitchen. The cruelty of his words caused a hush in the immediate vicinity. A few guests turned their heads, their eyebrows raised in amusement. This was the entertainment they loved, a domestic squabble among the nouveau riche. James straightened her spine. For the first time all night, the submissive posture vanished. She looked him in the eye, and the violet in her irises seemed to darken. My dress is clean, Julian, and I am your wife. If that embarrasses you, that is a deficiency in your character, not my attire. Julian blinked, stunned by her sudden defiance. Then his anger spiked. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. I don't have time for your sudden backbone, James. You are ruining this night. Isabella's father is watching. I can't have you dragging down my stock value with your presence. He began to pull her toward the grand double doors of the exit. Julian, stop, James said, her voice calm but firm. You are making a scene. I'm making a command decision, he spat. You're leaving, now. They reached the foyer. The doorman, dressed in red livery, looked away uncomfortably. Julian practically threw the cloakroom ticket at the attendant. Get her coat. The gray trench coat, the cheap one. Julian, James said, pulling her arm free. She stood in the center of the foyer, the cold wind from the revolving doors hitting her back. If you send me away tonight, you cannot ask me to return. Think very carefully about what you are doing. Julian laughed. It was a harsh, brittle sound. Ask you to return, James. Look at this place. Look at me. And look at you. We are in different stratospheres. Go home to the apartment. Pack your things. I think it's time we discussed a separation. I need a partner who fits my future, not my past. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. James stared at him for a long moment. There were no tears in her eyes, only a profound sense of disappointment. She took the coat from the attendant, but she didn't put it on. She draped it over her arm. "Very well, Julian," she said softly. "I will leave, but remember, you were the one who opened the door." "Just go." Julian waved his hand dismissively, turning his back on her to head back into the warmth of the party, back to Isabella and the money. James turned to the heavy glass doors. The doorman pushed them open for her. Outside, the London rain was coming down in sheets. It was a miserable night. James stepped onto the pavement, the water instantly soaking her thin shoes. She stood there for a moment, looking up at the gray sky. Inside, Julian grabbed a fresh glass of champagne, fixing his smile. "Apologies," he said to Isabella, who was waiting for him. "Just taking out the trash." Isabella laughed, clinking her glass against his. "To upward mobility, darling." "To the future," Julian agreed. And then the ground shook. It wasn't an earthquake. It was the sound of engines. Massive, powerful engines. The chatter in the ballroom died down as blue and red lights flashed against the high windows, washing out the warm glow of the chandeliers. But these weren't police lights. They were accompanied by the deep, rhythmic thrum of motorcycles, dozens of them. Julian frowned, walking toward the window overlooking the entrance. What is going on? Is there a fire? Below, the street had been cleared. Traffic was halted in both directions. A phalanx of police motorcycles, their sirens blaring in succinct bursts, formed a V formation. Behind them rolled a convoy that made the luxury cars of the guests look like toys. 6 black armored SUVs with diplomatic flags on the hoods. And in the center, a vehicle that was rarely seen on public streets, a Bentley state limousine, elongated and reinforced, flying a flag of deep royal purple with a golden falcon crest in the center. "The Prime Minister," someone whispered. "No," Lord Harrington said, stepping up beside Julian, his face pale. "That's a royal standard, but not British. That's the crest of Ethelgard." Julian squinted. "Ethelgard, the small European kingdom, the one with the trillions in diamond reserves." "The same," Harrington murmured. "But what on earth are they doing here?" Julian felt a strange knot form in his stomach. He looked down at the entrance. The convoy had stopped right in front of the hotel. The doormen were scrambling, unrolling a red carpet that seemed to have materialized out of nowhere. Men in dark suits with earpieces jumped out of the SUVs, securing the perimeter with military precision. They pushed back the paparazzi who had been waiting for the minor celebrities inside. Then the back door of the Bentley opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, imposing, with silver hair and a beard that was neatly trimmed. He wore a dark tailored suit that probably cost more than Julian's entire car. But it was the sash across his chest, purple and gold, and the small, intricate crown pin on his lapel that gave him away. King Alaric III of Ethelgard, the man known as the Iron Monarch. But the king didn't walk toward the hotel entrance. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked at the solitary figure standing in the rain, wearing a soaking wet blue chiffon dress and holding a gray trench coat. Julian pressed his face against the glass. That's James." Isabella laughed nervously behind him. "What is she doing?" "She's blocking the king's paths. She's going to get arrested." "Oh, this is perfect. Julian, your wife is about to be tackled by the royal guard." Julian watched his breath fogging the glass. He expected the security guards to shove James aside. He expected the king to ignore the peasant woman standing in his way. Instead, the king stopped. He ignored the umbrella held out by his aide. He walked straight into the pouring rain, his expensive shoes splashing in the puddles. He walked right up to James, and then the unthinkable happened. The Iron Monarch, the ruler of Ethelgard, the man who made prime ministers tremble, bowed. He bowed his head low before Julian's wife. Then he took her freezing hands in his and kissed them. Julian's champagne glass slipped from his fingers. It hit the floor and shattered, the sound echoing in the silent ballroom like a gunshot. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was a vacuum sucking the air out of the room. 200 of London's wealthiest people were pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, witnessing a scene that defied all logic. Down on the pavement the rain continued to fall, but James seemed immune to it now. King Alaric stood up, taking off his suit jacket and wrapping it tenderly around James's shoulders. He said something to her, something that made James nod slowly. Inside, Julian's mind was racing, misfiring. Mistaken identity, he thought frantically. She looks like someone else. Maybe she used to be his maid. His nanny. Julian, Isabella whispered, her voice trembling. Why is the King of Ethelgard giving his jacket to your wife? Before Julian could answer, the doors of the ballroom burst open. It wasn't the hotel staff. It was a squad of 6 royal guards dressed in ceremonial yet functional uniforms bearing the Golden Falcon insignia. They moved with terrifying speed, securing the room, their eyes scanning the crowd for threats. Behind them walked the hotel manager, looking as if he was about to have a heart attack, and a tall, severe-looking woman holding a tablet. "Ladies and gentlemen," the woman announced, her voice projecting without a microphone, "please remain where you are. His Majesty King Alaric is entering the premises." A collective gasp went through the room. People began frantically adjusting their ties and smoothing their dresses. Isabella Vance looked like she was about to faint. She grabbed Julian's arm. "We have to greet him. Julian, this is it. If we can get a photo with him." Julian felt numb. He couldn't move. He could only stare at the open doors. A moment later, King Alaric walked in. But he wasn't alone. Walking beside him, his jacket draped over her shoulders like a royal cape, was James. But she looked different. Her wet hair was slicked back, revealing the high arches of her cheekbones. Her posture had changed. The slump was gone. She walked with a natural, fluid grace that matched the king's stride perfectly. She didn't look at the floor. She looked straight ahead. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. The king and James walked down the center of the aisle. Julian stood frozen near the buffet table, Isabella clutching his arm. As they approached, Julian's instincts kicked in, the instincts of a salesman. "I have to fix this. I have to own this." He stepped forward, breaking the line. "James," he called out, putting on his best benevolent husband smile, though his eyes were terrified. "Darling, there you are. I was so worried when you stepped out into the rain. I was just coming to get you." He reached out a hand to touch her shoulder, to claim her, to show the king that she belonged to him. Snap! Before his hand could get within 6 inches of James, a guard moved with lightning speed. Julian's wrist was caught in a grip of steel. He was twisted around and forced to his knees in front of the entire assembly. "Let him go," James said. Her voice was calm, but it carried a tone of authority Julian had never heard before. It wasn't the voice of the woman who asked if he wanted tea. It was the voice of a woman used to being obeyed. The guard released Julian, who stumbled back, clutching his wrist. Isabella gasped and stepped away from him, distancing herself from the humiliation. King Alaric looked down at Julian with eyes like chips of ice. "You," the king rumbled. His voice was deep, accented, and terrifying. "You are the one who sent her into the storm." Your Majesty, it was a misunderstanding," Julian stammered, sweating profusely. "I didn't know. I mean, James is just... She's my wife." "Your wife?" The king let out a short, humorless laugh. He turned to the crowd, addressing the room. "You all see a woman in a simple dress," King Alaric announced. "You see someone you thought was beneath you, someone you mocked." He glared at Isabella, who shrank behind a waiter. "But I see my blood," Alaric continued. He placed a heavy hand on James's shoulder. "Allow me to introduce you properly. This is not merely James Thorne. This is Her Royal Highness Princess James Aurelia of Ethelgard, Duchess of the Northern Isles, and the heir to my throne." The shockwave was palpable. A glass dropped in the back of the room. "Princess," Julian whispered the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. "But you worked at a library. You lived in a studio apartment in Hackney." James turned to face him. Her expression wasn't angry. It was pitying. "I left the palace 5 years ago, Julian," she said softly. "I wanted to know if people could love me, not for my title, not for the diamond mines or the crown. I wanted a life of truth." She took a step closer to him. When I met you, I thought I found it. You were hungry, but you were kind. You had nothing, and you shared it with me. I love that man. She glanced at Isabella, then back to the terrified guests. But money didn't change you, Julian. It revealed you. You fell in love with the reflection of yourself in a golden mirror, and you forgot the woman holding it for you. James, wait, Julian pleaded, reaching out. I didn't know. If I had known. That is exactly the point, the king interrupted, his voice booming. If you had known, you would have treated her like a queen. But a true king does not need a title to recognize nobility. You treated her like garbage because you thought she had no value, and that Mr. Thorne is why you will never sit at my table. The king turned to James. Are you ready, my daughter? The plane is waiting. James looked around the room. She looked at the faces of the people who had sneered at her for years, the bankers' wives, the socialites, Isabella. They were all bowing now, curtsying awkwardly, terror in their eyes. She looked at Julian one last time. He looked small, pathetic. I'm ready, father, she said. She turned and walked away, the heavy oak doors swinging shut behind her, leaving Julian Thorne kneeling on the carpet, surrounded by the shattered glass of his own ambition. The heavy oak doors of the Kensington Palace Hotel ballroom had swung shut, but the vibration of their closing seemed to ripple through Julian Thorne's entire body. He was still on his knees. The damp spot on the carpet where James's wet shoes had stood was the only physical proof she had been there at all. For 10 seconds, the room was dead silent. Then the whispers started. At first they were like the rustling of dry leaves, but quickly they swelled into a roar of hushed, excited malice. Did you hear? A princess. She was a royal princess. And he threw her out. He literally threw the heir to the Ethelgardian throne into the street. Julian scrambled to his feet, his legs feeling like jelly. He looked around wildly for an ally, for anyone who would look at him with something other than contempt. He spotted Lord Holloway, the chairman of Sterling Corp., the man whose approval Julian had spent 6 months courting. Lord Holloway. Julian gasped, rushing toward the older man near the bar. My lord, you must understand. It was a domestic dispute. It has nothing to do with the merger. I am still the same man who... Lord Holloway didn't just turn away. He recoiled. He set his whiskey glass down on the table with a sharp clack. Mr. Thorne, Holloway said, his voice carrying effortlessly over the crowd, Sterling Corp prides itself on judgment. We invest in men who can spot value, men who can see the future. Holloway stepped closer, his face a mask of cold disgust. You had a diamond in your house, and you treated it like a pebble. If you are too blind to see the worth of your own wife, how can I trust you with my shareholders' millions? But it's just a marriage. It's personal, Julian pleaded. In our world, Julian, everything is personal, Holloway snapped. The deal is dead. Do not contact my office again. Julian watched as Holloway signaled to his entourage and walked out. The dominoes were falling fast. Julian, a voice purred beside him. It was Isabella Vance. He spun around, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. Isabella understood ambition. She understood the game. Isabella, thank God, you understand, don't you? It was a mistake. I can fix this. If I just get to Ethelgard, if I explain... Isabella laughed. It wasn't the flirtatious titter she had used earlier. It was a dry, mocking sound. She reached out and plucked the silk handkerchief from Julian's pocket, the one he had used to wipe his sweat, and dropped it on the floor. You really don't get it, do you? She said, her eyes glinting. I liked you because you were a shark, Julian. A winner. But tonight, you're not a shark. You're the bait, and you stink of desperation. She leaned in close, her perfume cloying and sweet. Social suicide isn't a good look on a man. Delete my number. She turned on her heel and walked away, her crimson dress swishing like a blade. Within 20 minutes, the ballroom was empty. The staff began clearing the tables, avoiding eye contact with the man standing alone in the center of the room. Julian walked out into the London night. The rain had stopped, but the air was freezing. His car was there, but he didn't get in. He walked. He walked for hours, his tuxedo shoes blistering his feet until he reached their apartment in Canary Wharf. It was a sterile, modern penthouse, all glass chrome and gray leather. It was the home he had insisted they buy because it looked the part. He opened the door. "James," he called out of habit. Silence answered him. He walked into the bedroom. Her side of the bed was made perfectly. He opened her closet. It was mostly empty. She hadn't taken much, just her old clothes. The expensive dresses he had forced her to buy for appearances were still hanging their tags on ghost-like. On her bedside table there was no note, no dramatic letter of goodbye. There was just a small velvet box. Julian sat on the edge of the bed, his hands trembling as he opened it. Inside was the cheap silver engagement ring he had bought her 3 years ago when he was a junior analyst with debt up to his eyeballs. He remembered the day he gave it to her. They were eating takeaway fish and chips on a park bench. He had apologized for how small the diamond was. "It's the biggest thing in the world to me, Julian," she had said, her eyes shining, "because it came from you." He stared at the ring now. Beside it, tucked into the velvet lining, was a small, folded piece of paper. He unfolded it. It was a receipt from a pawn shop dated 3 months ago. Item: gold heavy chain necklace. Value £450. Julian frowned. Why would she pawn a necklace? He gave her an allowance. A small one he was controlling with money, believing she wouldn't understand how to invest it, but enough for groceries. Then he saw the second receipt underneath. Payment: bespoke tailoring services for J. Thorne. Suit alterations for Crimson Gala. Cost £450. Julian stopped breathing. He remembered complaining about the fit of his tuxedo. He remembered shouting that he didn't have time to go to a tailor. He remembered coming home one day to find the suit perfectly altered hanging in his closet. He had assumed she used the household money. She had sold the only piece of jewelry she owned from her childhood, a gold chain she never took off to fix his suit for the party where he kicked her out. A guttural sound ripped from Julian's throat. He fell back onto the bed, curling around the cheap silver ring, and for the first time in 10 years, Julian Thorne wept. He didn't weep for the lost deal. He didn't weep for the humiliation. He wept because the silence in the apartment was deafening, and he finally realized that the quiet, boring woman who waited for him every night was the only thing in his life that had been real. And she was gone. 3,000 miles away, the air was crisp and smelled of pine and snow. The Royal Jet of Ethelgard. A modified Gulfstream G650 began its descent toward the capital city of Solara. James sat in a cream-colored leather seat, staring out the window at the jagged peaks of the Alps rising through the clouds. She was no longer wearing the wet blue dress. She had been changed into a cashmere lounge suit of soft ivory. Her hair was dried and pinned back with a diamond clip. A flight attendant had just cleared away a meal that cost more than her monthly grocery budget in London. "You haven't touched your wine, Your Highness," a deep voice rumbled from across the aisle. James turned. King Alaric was watching her. He looked older in the harsh cabin lighting than he had outside the hotel. His face was gray, and there was a slight tremor in his hand as he held his reading glasses. "I'm not thirsty, Father," she said quietly. "You are angry," Alaric stated. It wasn't a question. "I am tired," James corrected. "You made quite a scene. You humiliated him." "He humiliated himself," Alaric barked, his eyes flashing. "I watched him for 3 years, James. 3 years I let you play house with that commoner. I had my agents report on him every month. I genuinely hoped that he would be worthy of you. I wanted him to be the man who valued the woman, not the status. If he had stood by you tonight, if he had defended you against that viper in the red dress, I would have made him a duke. I would have given him the world." The king leaned forward, his voice dropping to a growl. "But he broke you. I saw it in your eyes. You were fading away, James. You were becoming a ghost in your own life." "I did not raise a ghost. I raised a queen." James looked back out the window. He wasn't always like that. The city, the ambition, it ate him. It changes people. It will not change you, Alaric said firmly, because you are made of stronger stuff. You are an Aurelia. The plane touched down smoothly. As they taxied to the private hangar, James saw the reception committee, hundreds of soldiers, a military band, flags waving in the wind. "I'm not ready for this," she whispered. "You do not have a choice," Alaric said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. He paused, his hand gripping the back of the seat for support. He took a sharp, wheezing breath, his face twisting in pain. "Father." James unbuckled her belt, instantly rushing to his side. "What is it?" Alaric waved her off, straightening up with immense effort. "It is nothing. Old age. Come, your people are waiting." But James saw the sweat beading on his forehead. She saw the pallor of his skin. The rumors she had ignored in London, rumors of the king's failing health, suddenly felt terrifyingly real. They descended the stairs. The cold wind bit at James's face, waking her up. As her foot touched the red carpet, the band struck up the national anthem. Cameras flashed in a blinding wall of light. Waiting at the bottom of the stairs was a man who looked like he had been carved out of marble. He was tall, with dark hair swept back severely and eyes that were a piercing, intelligent gray. He wore the uniform of the Royal Guard, but with the gold cords of a high advisor. This was Count Lucian Valerius, James's childhood friend, her fencing partner, and the man who had arguably been the most vocal opponent of her leaving Ethelgard 5 years ago. Lucian bowed, stiff and formal. "Welcome home, Your Highness." "Hello, Lucian," James said, trying to smile. Lucian didn't smile back. His eyes scanned her face, searching for weakness. "You look thin," he noted bluntly, "and tired. London did not agree with you." "It was an educational experience," James parried. "I am sure," Lucian said dryly. He fell into step beside her as they walked toward the waiting limousine. "The council is convened. We have a briefing in 1 hour regarding the border disputes with Bravia and the trade embargoes." 1 hour? James blinked. "Lucian, I just landed. I need to shower. I need to sleep." Lucian stopped walking. He turned to her, and for a second his mask slipped, revealing a desperate intensity. "The king collapsed twice last week, James. The doctors give him 6 months. Maybe less." James felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at her father, who was waving to the crowd, looking strong and invincible. "He didn't tell me." "He doesn't want you to worry," Lucian said. "But I need you to worry, because the wolves are circling. The Duke of Westphal is already challenging the succession, claiming you abandoned your duty by running off to play housewife in England. If you want to keep this throne, if you want to protect your father's legacy, you cannot sleep. You have to rule, starting now." James looked at the palace looming in the distance, a fortress of stone and glass on the edge of a cliff. It was beautiful, but it was a prison. In London she was invisible. Here she was a target. "I understand," James said, her voice hardening. She lifted her chin. "Take me to the council." 2 weeks later, the palace gardens. James sat on a stone bench surrounded by winter roses. She was wearing a gown of heavy velvet, weighing her down. She held a tablet reviewing agricultural reports. Her life had become a blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and public appearances. She was good at it. She had been trained for this since birth, but she felt hollow. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the rain in London. She saw Julian's face. She hated him for what he did, but she couldn't turn off the love she had felt for him. It was a phantom limb aching even though it was gone. "A penny for your thoughts." James looked up. It was Count Lucian. He was holding 2 cups of steaming tea. He sat down beside her, not too close, maintaining propriety. "I was thinking about the grain subsidies," she lied. "You were thinking about him," Lucian corrected. He sipped his tea. "The baker's son. The analyst." "His name is Julian," James snapped. "He has been trying to call," Lucian said casually. "The palace switchboard has blocked 42 calls from a London number in the last 3 days. He also sent 5 letters. Security scanned them, mostly begging, some weeping. You intercepted my mail. James stood up furious. I filtered out the harassment, Lucian said calmly. James, he is the past. He had his chance. He failed. You need to look forward. The Duke of Westfall is arriving tomorrow for the winter ball. He is going to propose a marriage alliance. And given your father's health, the council thinks you should accept. Westfall, James scoffed. He's 40 years older than me. He's cruel. He has the largest army in the region, Lucian pointed out. Marrying him secures the throne without bloodshed. I will not marry for an army, James said. I did that once. I married for love, and look where it got me. I won't make a mistake again. Then what will you do? Lucian asked. Because you need a consort, a king by your side to silence the dissenters. If not Westfall, then who? James looked at the gray sky. I don't need a king, Lucian. I need to be the queen. Lucian sighed. Idealism is a luxury we cannot afford right now. He stood up to leave. Oh, one more thing. Security reported an intruder at the border checkpoint this morning. Someone trying to enter the country without a visa, claiming to be your husband. James's heart stopped. Julian. He was turned away, obviously, put on a train back to Zurich. He has no money, no influence, and no way in. Lucian looked at her meaningfully. He is persistent. I'll give him that. But he is a gnat hitting a windshield. Forget him, James. Lucian walked away, leaving James alone in the cold garden. She sat back down, her hands shaking. Julian was here. Or he had tried to be. He had come for her. For the first time in 2 weeks, the ice around her heart cracked. Not enough to forgive him, but enough to wonder. Why did you come, Julian, she thought, to save your bank account or to save me? Julian Thorne had never known true cold. He thought he knew hardship from his childhood in East London, but the cold of the Ethelgardian borderlands was a living, breathing beast. He was in the village of Kalin, the last outpost before the mountain pass that led to the capital. He had no car. His credit cards had been frozen by Sterling Corp, who sued him for breach of contract, and his assets in London were seized. He had sold his Rolex in Zurich to buy a train ticket and a thick wool coat that smelled of wet dog. He looked nothing like the polished financier of Canary Wharf. His beard was grown out, patchy, and rough. His eyes were sunken. He looked like a beggar. You can't cross the pass, outsider, the innkeeper said, wiping down the wooden bar. The blizzard is coming. Even the goats don't go up there today. Julian warmed his hands around a mug of cheap broth. I have to get to Solara. To the palace, the innkeeper laughed. To see the Princess you and every other dreamer. They say she's to be betrothed to Duke Westfall on the night of the winter solstice. That's in 2 days. The roads are closed for the royal convoy. Julian froze. Westfall. In the last week of hitchhiking and sleeping in train stations, Julian had heard the name Westfall whispered everywhere. The people feared him. They said he was taxing the farmers into starvation to fund his private militia. They said he was waiting for the king to die so he could turn the kingdom into a military state. If James married him, she wouldn't be a queen. She would be a prisoner. Again. I need to get there, Julian whispered. Is there another way? A service road, a trail? Only the pilgrims climb, an old man in the corner muttered. The old path over the ridge, but it's steep, and with the snow. Show me on the map, Julian said, standing up. He didn't do it for ambition. He didn't do it because he thought she would take him back. He did it because he remembered the look in her eyes at the gala, the look of someone totally alone. He had put that look there, and he would die before he let another man put it there again. High in the palace of Solara, the atmosphere was suffocating. King Alaric was confined to his bed. His breathing was shallow, the heart monitors beeping a slow, irregular rhythm. James sat by his side, holding his hand. "You must secure the future." Alaric wheezed, his grip weak. "Westfall is dangerous, but without him, civil war. I can handle Westfall, father." James promised, though she didn't believe it herself. The doors opened and Duke Westfall entered. He was a large man with a face that looked like it had been chiseled from granite and cold, predatory eyes. He didn't bow to the dying king. He nodded curtly to James. "Your Highness," Westfall said, his voice booming in the quiet room. "The council grows impatient. The engagement papers must be signed before the solstice ball tomorrow night. The people need stability. The people need a king who is still breathing," James hissed, standing up to block his view of her father. "Have some respect." Westfall stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Respect is earned through power, James. You have none. You are a librarian who played dress-up. Without my army, the southern provinces will revolt. Sign the papers, marry me, or watch your kingdom burn." He turned and left, leaving the threat hanging in the air. James sank back into the chair. She felt a tear slide down her cheek. She touched the empty spot on her neck where her mother's locket used to be, the one she had sold. She felt completely stripped of defense. "Lucian!" she called out. Count Lucian appeared from the shadows. "Is there no dirt on him?" she asked desperately. "No scandal? No corruption we can use to blackmail him?" "We have looked, your highness," Lucian said, his face grim. "His books are impeccable. He hides his theft well. We know he is stealing from the treasury, but we cannot prove it. Without proof, we cannot arrest a duke. We need a financial miracle." The miracle was currently freezing to death on the side of a mountain. Julian slipped his knee, slamming into the jagged rock hidden beneath the snow. He screamed in pain, the sound swallowed by the howling wind. He was 3,000 meters up. The air was thin. His fingers were blue. He dragged himself up. "Keep moving. If you stop, you die." He thought about the night he met James. She was reading a book in the park. He had sat next to her eating a sandwich. She had offered him a napkin. It was such a small thing. Kindness. I traded kindness for a merger, he thought bitterly. He crested the ridge. Below him, the valley of Solara spread out, glittering like a bowl of diamonds. The palace stood on the cliff, glowing with golden light. He began the descent. It was easier, but his body was shutting down. He stumbled into the outskirts of the city just as the sun began to rise on the day of the solstice. He didn't go to the palace gates. He knew the guards would shoot a vagrant on sight. Instead, he went to the one place he knew better than anyone else, the central bank of Ethelgard. He waited in the alley until the junior clerks arrived. He grabbed a young man wearing a familiar gray suit, the uniform of an analyst. "Help me," Julian croaked, grabbing the man's lapel. The clerk yelped. "Get off me, guard." "Wait." Julian pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, the only thing he had kept from his past life. It was his business card. Julian Thorne, Senior Analyst, Sterling Corp. "I know how to read the ledger of shadows." Julian gasped. "I know how men like Westfall hide their money. I can prove it, but I need a terminal. I need access." The clerk looked at the card, then at the desperate, freezing man. You're the husband, the one from the news." "Please," Julian begged. "I don't want money. I want to save the Queen." The grand ballroom of the royal palace made the hotel in London look like a broom closet. The ceilings were painted with frescoes of ancient battles, and the floor was polished marble. But the mood was funereal. James stood on the dais wearing the ceremonial crown of Ethelgard. It was heavy, hurting her neck. Beside her stood Duke Westfall, looking smug in his military dress uniform. The nobility of the realm were gathered. They whispered behind their fans. They knew this wasn't a marriage. It was a hostile takeover. "Lords and ladies," the high priest announced, "we gather tonight to unite the houses of Aurelia and Westfall, to secure the peace." James's hands were shaking. She looked at the contract on the table before her. If she signed it, she gave Westfall control of the army and the treasury. If she didn't, he would launch a coup within the week. She picked up the quill. "Sign it, my dear," Westfall whispered, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "And try to look happy." "Look." James lowered the pen to the paper. Bang! The heavy double doors at the end of the hall didn't just open, they were thrown open with such force that they hit the walls with a thunderous crash. The music stopped. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was Count Lucian, and beside him, supported by 2 guards, was a man who looked like he had walked out of a nightmare. Julian. He was wearing ill-fitting clothes borrowed from a bank clerk. His face was windburned, his lips cracked, and he was limping heavily, but his eyes were blazing with a fire that terrified the aristocrats nearby. "Stop!" Julian shouted. His voice was raspy, broken, but it filled the hall. "Seize him!" Westfall roared, his face turning purple. "He is an intruder, a peasant! He is a witness!" Count Lucian bellowed, stepping in front of Julian, his hand on his sword. "And he speaks with the authority of the royal audit." James dropped the quill. She took a step forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Julian!" Julian shook off the guard supporting him. He limped down the long aisle, clutching a stack of printed documents in his hand. He ignored the gasps, the stares, the whispers. He only looked at James. He stopped at the foot of the dais. He didn't look at Westfall. "You can't sign that," Julian wheezed, holding up the papers. "He's bankrupt, James." Westfall froze. "Lies remove this filth." "It's all here," Julian said, his voice gaining strength. He turned to the crowd, holding up the evidence. "I spent the last 6 hours tracing the shell companies. The Duke of Westfall hasn't been funding the army with his own money. He's been leveraging the kingdom's debt against offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. He's not rich. He's a fraud. He's siphoning the pension funds of the soldiers to pay for his own estates." Julian threw the papers at Westfall's feet. "If he marries you, he gets immunity. He gets access to the royal treasury to cover his tracks. He's not saving the kingdom, James. He's looting it." The room erupted. Generals looked at Westfall with sudden suspicion. If he stole their soldiers' pensions, he was a dead man. "Is this true?" General Kalen stepped forward, picking up a document. He scanned it, his eyes widening. "These routing numbers. These are the missing funds from the northern garrison." Westfall drew his sword. "This is treason. I will not be judged by a foreign beggar." He lunged toward Julian, the blade gleaming. James didn't think. She didn't scream. She moved. She grabbed the heavy ceremonial scepter from the table, a rod of solid gold, and swung it with all the force of her pent-up rage. It connected with Westfall's wrist with a sickening crack. The sword clattered to the floor. Westfall howled, clutching his arm. "Guards!" James screamed, her voice echoing with the power of a true queen. "Arrest this traitor!" Count Lucian and General Kalen were on him in a second. Westfall was tackled, subdued, and dragged away, shouting curses. Silence returned to the hall, but it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of awe. James stood on the dais, breathing hard, the scepter still in her hand. She looked down at Julian. He was swaying. The adrenaline was fading and the exhaustion was taking over. He looked up at her, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on his face. "I fixed the merger," he whispered, a weak, sad smile touching his lips. "I'm good at the numbers, James. That's all I was ever good for." His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed onto the marble floor. 3 days later, Julian woke up in a bed that was softer than clouds. The room smelled of lavender and antiseptic. He tried to sit up, but his body ached everywhere. "Easy," a voice said. James was sitting in the chair by the window. She wasn't wearing a crown. She was wearing a simple blue dress very similar to the one she wore that night in London. "You've been asleep for 3 days," she said softly. The doctors say you have severe hypothermia and exhaustion. You almost died, Julian. Julian looked at his hands. They were clean, bandaged. Westfall, he asked. In the dungeon. The council is seizing his assets. The kingdom is safe. She stood up and walked to the side of the bed. Why did you do it? She asked. You could have stayed in Zurich. You could have started over. Julian looked at her. I realized something, James. That night in the rain. He reached into the pocket of the pajama shirt someone had dressed him in. It was empty. He panicked. Looking for this? James held up her hand. In her palm sat the cheap silver engagement ring, and tangled with it was the gold chain she had pawned. Lucian found it in your coat pocket, she said. You bought my necklace back. I used the last of my money, Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. I wanted to bring it to you. I wanted to tell you that I know I can't be your husband. I lost that right. I'm a selfish, arrogant man who broke the best thing he ever had. He looked her in the eyes. But I wanted you to know that I saw you. Finally. I saw you, James. And I wanted to serve you just once without asking for anything in return. James looked at the ring. Then she looked at the man. He wasn't the shiny, perfect husband she had married. He was broken, scarred, and humble. You are right, James said. You can't be my husband. Julian nodded, looking away, accepting his fate. I understand. I'll leave as soon as I can walk. You can't be my husband, James repeated, because the man I married in London is dead. He died in the snow on that mountain. She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. But the man who climbed a mountain to save me, the man who faced a duke with nothing but a piece of paper and his courage. She squeezed his hand. I think I would like to get to know him. Julian looked up, hope fragile in his eyes. James, I have nothing. You have the Queen's favor, she whispered, leaning down and kissing his forehead. And you have time. Don't waste it. Outside the window, the snow began to fall again, covering the tracks of the past, leaving a pristine white page ready for a new story to be written. And that is the story of Julian and James. From the cold streets of London to the throne of Ethelgard, they learned that true royalty isn't about blood or crowns, it's about character. Julian had to lose everything, his money, his status, and his pride to find the one thing that actually mattered, the woman he loved. He thought he was saving her by fixing the merger, but in the end she saved him by teaching him what it means to be a man. What do you think? Did Julian deserve a second chance? Or should James have sent him away for good after what he did at the party? It's a tough one. Let me know in the comments below. Would you forgive him? If you enjoyed this story of heartbreak, redemption, and royal justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Share this with a friend who loves a good drama, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.